Hello, and welcome to another episode of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. And today I have a special guest talking about a topic we haven't covered on the podcast yet, so I'm very excited. Today I'm joined by Jessica Bluemke. Jess, thanks
Hi.
for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's start with just an introduction. Can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you kind of got into our subject material, which is equine therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason you know who I am, and if anybody's listening, I'm a co-host of the Friendly Atheist Podcast with Hanson Center. And then in my real life, part of my real life, I work for a therapeutic horseback riding center in Burr Ridge. It's called the Hanson Center. It's owned by the Ray Graham Association. It's an Illinois-based nonprofit. And I've been involved on and off with the Hanson Center since I was a teenager, actually. Maybe even younger. I grew up near this barn where I now work, and was a horse kid, as so many of us were. And this was one of the few ways I could interact with horses. But what it is it's a barn that serves primarily kids and adults with various disabilities, ranging from emotional PTSD, things like that, up to we have kids who are pretty, very autistic, pretty far along the spectrum, maybe nonverbal, often can't physically walk. And yeah, so I guess just to sort of dive in head first, I love talking about this stuff. So if I get too deep in the woods, please let me know. Also, I should say I am not a therapeutic horseback riding instructor. I work for this barn, but I don't. I volunteer with the kids. I work very, very closely with all the instructors who do, but I'm not certified. So just, for what it's worth.
Yes.
So there's kind of two different flavors of horse-based therapy. The first is hippotherapy, which is something I'm learning about right now. So hippotherapy, just so you know, a little Latin lesson. Hippopotamus is Latin for a water horse. So hippo is actually the Latin root for horse. So when you see things like hippodrome and things like that, it's about horses, not hippopotamus, although what a magical world that would be. So hippotherapy is a version of therapy that really just physically uses the horse's movement and dynamics as they walk to do physical therapy and occupational therapy. So we've got somebody leading the horse. We've got a physical therapist on their right, an occupational therapist on the left. So you're walking around. The two therapists are on either side of the horse. The rider's on the horse. And they're doing, and in this, they're not learning to ride a horse. They're not learning that whoa means stop or squeeze your legs means go. They're just using, and essentially they can bill it to insurance because they bill the horses as like dynamic surfaces or something like that. And they're just using the movement of the horse to facilitate therapy. So when you're riding a horse, whether you're bareback, whatever saddle you have, your hips, your lower body actually move the same way they do when you're walking. So what that does, especially for our riders who aren't strong enough to stand up on their own or don't have the capacity to stand on their own, what they're doing is they're building up those core muscles that help you stand up. And it has all of these really like far-reaching effects. I heard one of the therapists told me a story of this kid who, was 8 or 9 and was never potty trained. And then he starts hippotherapy and all of a sudden his pelvic floor is strengthened, because when you think about just holding yourself up in a chair on a stool, that's a lot of work, let alone stabilizing while the horse is moving under you. And so that's what hippotherapy is all about at our barn. It's very much like they'll come for 8, 10, 12-week sessions. It's not a consistent thing. The therapeutic riding end of it is what I'm more involved in, and I can dig into a little more. So the essential part of it is that we're teaching kids and adults to ride horses. Horses have a huge therapeutic benefit because they are herd animals. So the same way dogs and not so much cats, you know, want to be around you and kind of foster a sense of community. Horses are the same way. And people, I cannot explain what it is about horses that just sort of triggers something in people that's really, if they're not afraid of horses, there's something very special about the bond between a person and a horse. And to look at a kid who's maybe young or maybe has been in a wheelchair for most of their life, or can't really stand up independently, you put them on this horse, and yeah, you can have a couple people physically supporting them, but that person is physically taller than everybody else, and they're controlling this giant 1,000-pound animal. Of course, they're getting guidance, but the emotional feeling of being in charge of something and bonding with an animal, it is something that's really, really special and really meaningful to people. So one of the things I really enjoy talking about is kind of how horses interact with each other and with people. Because horses, and I always joke, I do tours at the barn, and I always joke, this might like millennial trying to talk to Gen Z, or like horses just kind of operate on vibes. They, if you imagine, you know, they were wild animals, they're prey animals. So everything about how they function and how they move through the world goes back to being a prey animal. So they are constantly on the lookout for, people call them goblins. Like, is there a goblin around? Because they're just constantly looking around. Now, if you're in a horse herd, right, and there's 100 horses and there's a wolf on the left side of the herd, they don't have words to, you know, communicate things. And so it is just a vibe shift that goes through. It is agitation. It is like that feeling of being up. And that clicks in with horses really, really quickly. So when you approach a horse and you're up and have a lot of energy, or you're afraid, your horse is reading that like, oh God, what's around? Is there a gerblin? Like, is somebody going to get me? And so that's why when you see people who are afraid of horses, they often have negative interactions with that horse, because the horse is like, yeah, you're right. This is scary. What's going on here? But, and especially the horses that we use for our program, are the calm of them is something that's really hard to kind of portray unless you're there. There is just something very peaceful about spending time with animals in general, and these kind of big, huge animals that are, you know, dangerous, but in general very gentle and not malicious, right? There's something really, really magical about it, to be blunt. And there's a ton, I mean, I have lots of opinions about lots of things, but there are many, many people who volunteer with us at the barn who they consider it their therapy as well, because they come in, they groom horses. And, you know, if you've ever gone for a walk with your dog in the woods, or just had a kind of moment of peace in a rural adjacent environment, I think there's something to be said about having, as humans, I feel like we have jobs that sort of don't end and don't come to a satisfying conclusion. But when I have to go in and clean a stall, it's a 15-minute chore, and it's, you know, I break a sweat and all that stuff. And when I'm done, that stall is clean and looks nice, and I have the job satisfaction of having done a job and can see the results right away. So I think that's another part of it, of being able to end tasks, which we don't get to do ever, right?
Right. Well, and thinking of terms of like grooming and taking care of that horse, like the responsibility, but also building that connection and that bond with it. And yes, task completion, that gives us dopamine. So I'm a city slicker. I was born in the city. I still live in the city. I have very few interactions with horses. So I'm curious. I know a lot about therapy dogs. One of mine was good temperament. Rescue dogs are always a bit of a wash with what you're going to get. And so he was Canine Good Citizen certified, which is like the level under therapy dog. So are there breeds of horses that specifically work well with this? Are there types of horses that like do the horses need to get certified and special
Wait,
training? Like,
hold
tell me
on,
a little
hold
bit.
on. Are you telling me you're about to let me talk about horses for like 20 minutes and it's going to be recorded and other
Yes,
people will listen to it? This is the dream. This
that
is
is
the
why you are
dream.
here. Yes. Teach us. We learned a little bit of Latin already, so now I'm excited to
Yes.
learn about horses.
Okay. So horses come in a few different chunks, right? So you have ponies, those are small horses. Small horses are full grown at that size, right? Ponies are not baby horses. Then you have your kind of standard horses, and then you've got warm bloods and draft breeds. And there's a lot of variations therein. So essentially, depending, I almost got real deep in the weeds about breed
Start with a
standards.
city. Start with a city slicker who
Yeah. Start with
knows
city
what
slicker. So
Clydesdales are, and that's about it.
okay, so imagine you are a farmer in 9th century England and you have to plow your field or whatever. What are you looking for in an animal? You're looking for somebody big and sturdy who's not going to get injured easily. Looking for a horse that is calm enough that if they get stuck somewhere, if something goes wrong, they're not going to panic immediately. You don't need them to be especially fast, right? You don't need them to be, have any like quick reaction skills. You're looking for a really steady animal who you can put in front of a cart and they will walk up and down that field all day. So that's where draft horses in general come from. And there's a huge overlap. So like your Haflingers and Fjords and things like that have those same standards, but they're not the same size. So essentially people bred out horses to do very specific tasks. So you have horses that are race horses, right? That are bred to be fast and slick. And those horses are out of their goddamn minds because nobody breeds them to be sensible or calm or whatever. They breed them to be fast,
Sure.
right? So when you work with thoroughbreds or even some other like high-end like saddlebreds and things like that, when they're bred for a function that is going fast, clicking, like lifting their legs all fancy, having a really arched head, tail set or head or whatever, when they're breeding to those, you're going to end up with a thoroughbred, which is a fucking lunatic, and they will, see a shadow. I rode a horse who was a thoroughbred. Boy, what was his name? Hank was his name. And we would be in the arena cantering, which is like a slow gallop thing. And every time we got to this one corner, when it was nighttime and the lights were on in the arena, his shadow would pop up on the wall. And every fucking time we turned that corner, he would spook at that shadow. It's the same thing. He's out over and over again. But just his breed is one that it's fine for them to be like lunatics because they are bred to be fast or high jumpers or fancy movers. As opposed to the horses we are looking for, which is the opposite. So to it, we have a couple draft crosses. So that means they're half draft horse, which is kind of that big, calm animal. That's going to help us with a temperament. Generally, the bigger the horse, the mellower they are. Ponies are the ones you have to be careful. It's not unlike dogs, actually. Like the little yippy ones are the ones who are going to fuck you up, and the big ones are like, they might accidentally knock you over, but they're not doing it out of maliciousness.
Yes, I have two Great Dane mixes, and they are gentle giants. And
exactly.
I have a Chihuahua who is a psychopath.
See, you understand. Now you understand ponies versus draft horses.
All of them. I'm on board. I get it.
So in terms of temperament, we tend to end up with either draft crosses. We have a lot of quarter horses. So quarter horses are a very American breed. They are the cowboy horse. They're a really versatile breed. They can look like a lot of different things. But in general, with quarter horses, just like with dogs, every breed has like the thing that you're like stoked about them being able to do. And quarter horses are kind of like a lab. They are a very good all-around horse. They've been used. They have been used all through American history to. I mean, obviously, the cowboys and the problematic, genocide of it all. But when you imagine a cowboy in the Old West, they're riding a quarter horse. They're short, they're stocky, they can move quickly, like spin around, because if you're in a pen and you're sorting cattle and you have to get this one calf, the horse has to be smart and calm and focused and quick. So they tend to have pretty mellow attitudes. And then the last one, and I just learned this a couple months ago, and I just find it really fascinating. We have a handful of Icelandic horses on our property, which are from Iceland. And we've had a few, and they've always been very calm and wonderful, and I just adore them. And I learned that the reason Icelandic horses are so, you guess why Icelandic horses might be calmer than another breed of horses. So think about, why are horses nervous?
Predators.
Because predators.
So Iceland has very few natural predators.
There's no apex predators in Iceland. So they've evolved away from having that prey instinct. I mean, they still have it, obviously, but it's not as notable because of generations of not having to, breed specifically to be fast and alert and scared. So,
sure.
It's all, I think, really interesting stuff. So yeah, and you asked kind of about certification, and that's part of what my job has been recently, has been going to find horses that work for our program. And friend, it's really, really, really hard. It is, I think anybody who has done a career change or tried something new and just sort of splatted face first and it didn't work at all, you know, that feeling of like, oh, I really thought this skill would transfer to that, and it's just not the same. So we've definitely gone through horses who, they come in and they aren't happy doing the program that we have. They don't like the kind of work that we do, whether it's too much or too little or too loud or not interesting enough. You just kind of never know. But we are always looking for horses who are smallish and strong. And so that's when you get like your halflingers, which are God, are they British? Or like Northern European breed. They are really small and they are tough as nails, and like they can survive really cold weather. They are really, we call it sound, like they don't get injured easily. So like thoroughbreds, they hurt themselves if they look at the ground wrong, because they're very dainty and they're very lanky. Whereas the guys we have, their legs are stocky, their feet are big because they can hold more weight that way. And that's really important for what we do, because even if we have a rider who's bigger, and obviously we have weight limits, I guess I haven't even, I haven't even watched through what therapeutic riding looks like. Yikes, sorry. I'm so sorry.
We'll get there. We have time.
Yeah, so they when you are in a lesson, you can have as many as 3 people around the horse. So one person leading the horse, and then 2 people, we call them sidewalkers. Sometimes they're just spotty, but oftentimes they're physically holding the person's leg onto the saddle, because if their top end balance it, falls off balance, you have them kind of ground into the saddle more or less. So imagine a half-hour lesson walking around, a ring like this with your arm up against a person's leg. If the horse is this big, you're going to wear out your volunteers. And so we're always looking for short horses and strong horses, because we do have bigger people, and especially those who, have mobility issues. It's very easy to put on weight in that way. And we do have, it's called a lift. God, I don't know why it's called that. Literally, you sit in a chair and there's an apparatus that comes under your arms and under your legs and literally lifts you up, slides you over, and then lowers you down onto the horse. And the first time I watched this huge machine lower a human, it was like Peter Pan, right? Like they're just floating over, just right onto the horse, and the horse just stood there. And I was astounded. I remember that I was a teenager, and I remember watching it happen and just having a moment of like, dang, we can get horses to do anything. Because if you had told me that that was possible or feasible or easy to accomplish, I would have been like, no, that's an insane thing. That's what a crazy person would do, is put a machine onto a horse. That's insane. But yeah, so the therapeutic riding lessons themselves tend to be, we have between 1 and 4 riders max. I think usually it's about 2 or 3. And most of our riders have been with us for years. The majority of them, when they come, there's a very, very, very long wait list for the program. And so frequently once they get in, they stay in. There's not a ton of therapeutic riding programs around where we live. So if you're a new rider, you would come in and we would do a little bit of an evaluation in terms of your ability and your needs. So when we start to think about pairing a new rider with a horse, you start thinking about, I mean, obviously size. We've got one kid, Tim, who is 6'5", maybe. So he has to go on our big, tall horse. And then we have little ones that if you put them on even a small pony, if that pony's too wide, their legs are like out in the splits and it's uncomfortable. So you have to be really aware of sort of their rider and what their needs are and the horse. So it's a lot of work to figure out good pairings between people, because horses have very strong personalities, just like people, just like dogs. And there are riders who maybe will make a clicking sound sometimes, and that could upset them. You have to think about how each rider is interacting with the horse. So you have to think about size and movement, and also, okay, Tim has to be on Prince because he's so tall, but Prince doesn't like being closed in on his back end. So nobody can have a sidewalker with Prince because of X. Like, it's just constant, this horse needs this and this rider needs that. And you just have to make it kind of all stack up and work together. And it's tough.
Do the horses, so like with a therapy dog, you can give it certain commands and it learns, like, okay, go lay next to this other person, or put its head on your lap, or like move away from them and lay by the door. So like with the therapeutic riding horses, is that something where they have their natural instincts, but they've been trained to respond to certain stimuli? Or like if that vibe is off, is the person kind of like leading the horse?
That's a really, really interesting question, because we generally don't train horses the way we train dogs in terms of like voice commands. We'll, which isn't completely, we say, walk on is something they know, whoa is something they know. And even just kind of talking to horses, they get your tone and your vibe. And a lot of times I coach my riders to talk to their horse in the lowest voice they have, and easy. It's okay. And like that calms them down and calms their horse down. But in terms of that, so that's just such an interesting question. I never thought of anything like that, because no, it's really, it's therapy. It's less emotional therapy and more physical therapy. The emotional therapy, I think, is more of a happy byproduct of the physical benefits of it. Because our horses are so good. They are really good at responding to what they think they're supposed to be doing. We have one rider who, again, is nonverbal. She can't really support herself, but she can pull back and she can make her horse back up. So when you're riding a horse, pulling back means stop. If you keep pulling, they're going to back up. She can pull that, and her horse Ziggy, as soon as he feels that, he'll back up because he knows what's expected of him, and he can tell that all of the people around him are encouraging him to back up. But aside from that, like we teach the kids walk on, whoa, things like that, more to sort of foster a cause and effect thing of when you do this happens. Because we are teaching our kids to talk to horses in a new language, kind of, right? Like, we say walk on, that's obviously English, but squeezing your legs together isn't how a human being says go, right? That's not how we naturally want to. So you're also teaching these kids, if you do this, your horse will do that. It's a really quick cause and effect of you pull to the right, your horse is going to go to the right. And the feeling of being able to control a big animal like that is really powerful, really powerful.
Yeah, and it's almost like a modeling then of, if you do this, your horse is going to do this. So even though it's maybe not emotional in that sense, like, to kind of a biofeedback loop of, like, if you want your horse to calm down, you're doing this, which is modeling for that child or that whoever the rider is, that, like, you controlling your emotions and your behaviors will have this effect.
100%. And it makes me think, and this isn't something I've done a ton of research on, but horses have been used as therapy tools in a lot of different settings, including in prison rehabilitation. Because the fact is, with horses, you can't force them. Well, you can, but like, you can't force them to do anything they don't want to do, right? Unless you're going to beat the shit out of your horse, which I would roundly discourage.
Yeah.
They're gigantic animals. They're not going to do anything they don't want to do. So if you are, say, a guy who has been taught his whole life that anger is the only way to get what you want, or aggression is the only, intimidation is the way you get what you want, you put that person with a horse and that shit is not going to fly, because you cannot out intimidate a horse, because it can kick you in your dumb head. Sure. And so learning this element of partnership as opposed to controlling is something that's really valuable. And to what you said, if you come in angry or hot or whatever, your horse is going to read that immediately and be like, "Oh, friend, not today." I teach riding lessons to independent riders, and I have one student who deals with a ton of anxiety, and she will come in and then come to me like near tears, like, "My horse is acting like this," and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "Okay, well, you are wound up tighter than a spring right now. So maybe, do you think maybe he's picking up on that?" And it is a way for her now to look externally to see what her emotions are looking like, almost, right? Like, if her horse is like acting weird and all of us are like, "He's been fine with me," are you coming in with like a bananas energy? Are you like, are you upset about something and he's picking up on that? And you can't fake stuff like that. You can't fake being calm around a horse. They know the difference between like still intense and calm. Like, I do just in my day-to-day working with horses, I do so much like meaningful exhaling, because I can feel myself getting, and I have ADHD. I am a super like hyperactive person. And so it is a thing that I work on all the time, is getting my energy down and not being, if I'm coming in with like an agitating energy, that is going to be reflected on the animals I'm working with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so fascinating, because I think with PTSD, we talk a lot about, for therapists who are trauma informed, we talk about how trauma isn't just in your brain, it's also in your body. And so when you have an environment where you're getting these, you have to use your body, you have to be in touch with your body to communicate with the horse. That's such a different way to process, but that is the way that we process something like trauma. So I think that, it makes a lot of sense as you're talking about it. I think too, bilateral stimulation is really good, we know, for processing trauma. So I can imagine that motion of being on a horse. I've never ridden a horse. So
wait, hold on. Could you say that bilateral stimulation is good for trauma? Could you dig into that? That went over my head.
For sure. Bilateral stimulation. So when our brain has to process stimuli coming from both directions. So walking, reading, the natural eye movement. So EMDR is a big trauma technique to work with somebody who's trauma. So it's eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. So you're following lights moving across kind of in front of you, and your eyes are moving back and forth. It's bilateral stimulation. And so we know now. Yeah.
So like, would a movie or something like that, is that not bilateral stimulation?
Because no, because it's coming in from one direction.
But and reading so, like, is.
Because your eyes are having to move back and forth.
Oh, oh,
Yeah.
bilateral stimulation. That's really
So
interesting.
I don't know nothing about horses, but I know about trauma. So I'm just connecting some dots in my own head. I haven't looked into the research at all, but I would imagine there's some at least kind of cursory benefit from that motion of
Yeah.
being on a horse.
That's very, very interesting. Interesting fact about horses, they their brains are not bilateral. So if you're walking a horse around and he sees something in his right eye, like a big scary flag is all of a sudden in a place that it's not supposed to. And he sees it, he's like, ah, and he goes by it a couple times to, circling to the left and it's fine, turns the other way, ah, he sees it again because the process
Sure.
didn't go from his right eye to his left eye. So he's reprocessing it again. So it's just one of those things when we have something new in the arena, I have to tell my kids, go both directions. Make sure he sees it with both eyes because otherwise it's not gonna cross over.
Yeah. Man, I need to look more into horse therapy because now I'm like,
I,
I wonder if this would be better for trauma than people realize.
we have kids, we have people with PTSD and things like that. There's a ton of emotional benefits to being on horses.
Well, it's just such a holistic approach because again, you're building a relationship which is meaningful. You have commitment. You're showing up on time and you're meeting with this horse. You're getting to learn about the horse. You're getting that in the moment biofeedback. You're getting bilateral stimulation, and then for the people who are maybe more able-bodied or doing more responsibility, learning how to take care of the horse and responsibility that way. So like I can just imagine how it's such a encompassing like. Showing up to the barn is such a positive for people.
Well, and also you talked about stimulation, but the smells of a barn, the way the light, like it is very like you said, all encompassing. You walk in and it smells like barn. It smells like hay. It smells like whatever. It, and it doesn't hurt that at our barn anyway, the volunteers who are there are just mostly women, lovely women, happy to be there, love the horses, love learning about the horses, love catching up on each other's lives. Like they build these little communities. And a lot of people come in to volunteer and kind of say like, this is my therapy. This is how I feel better about my day. I just come in and get some hands-on time with horses and I just feel better.
Yeah.
Would you mind if I picked your brain for 1 second? I have
go ahead.
So my coworkers and I, all of whom are women, have been talking a lot about why girls tend to be attracted to horses and women tend to be attracted to horses more so than boys and men. And I recently had a kind of weirdly illuminating experience online. Where did you see the movie Nope by any chance?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. That's gonna make a lot of things easier for me. So you know, at the end, it's a fly mask. The horse has that bright green fluorescent mask on his face. So it's called a fly mask. It's mesh, and it's so to help keep flies out of horses' eyes and ears.
Okay.
That's it. It's completely see-through. People are like, it's the number one thing people ask of like, oh my God, is that horse blindfolded? Nope, see-through. So after that movie came out, I posted on this movie group that I'm in. I'm like, hey, just out of curiosity, I'm sure this is everybody's first time seeing this thing. What do you think that thing is for? Like in real life? And I swear to God, Jeremy, to a man, all the dudes said, is it blindfold so you can completely control the horse? So you can have the horse completely under your control? And I swear to God, it felt so fucking sinister to me. And I went back and I was talking to my coworkers, and we were talking about how much horseback riding is a partnership, and that people don't seem to understand that of you're constantly learning how to communicate more effectively with your horse and learning how, like you said, biofeedback affects your horse. Like I have my kids, whenever you're sitting on something stable, put your hands under your tailbones, like under your butt bones, not your tailbones, but your hip bones, and shift back and forth a little bit and feel how much you can feel the weight shift onto your hands. And then think about how that like goes down into a horse. So even if you just shift your body a little bit like this, they can feel that. Like if you've
Hmm.
ever had a backpack where one strap is too short and you're just like, oh, I hate this, they can feel all of those things. And so it's always learning how to most effectively communicate with your horse. So you're breaking down any communication barriers. And I will tell you, I've had the pleasure of riding horses that you just connect with. Like it feels like I think this thing and he does it. It's rare, but it's,
Yeah.
it's a really, and it requires, of course, a lot of training, a lot of all of that stuff, and just serendipity. Anyway, all that's to say is I found the dude's response to that really chilling, and kind of it fostered a conversation with my coworkers about why it is that girls are so crazy about horses, and that sort of need for me. I guess it's two different questions, but do you have any insight? I mean, you can just
I I'm
you can say no, this
I'm
is dumb, Jess. Let's move on.
no, it's an interesting question. I'm shooting from the hip a little bit. I think a couple of things, because I think a lot of it is socialization. So you think in terms of like unicorns and magical experiences and being a princess and getting
Mm-hmm.
like a castle, and like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of that stuff is geared towards females, or people who are socialized as girls. And so I think there's an awareness of something like a horse growing up. And then I think for dudes, or male identifying people, like cowboys are really it. And like
Yeah.
I have a friend who worked on a ranch, and like life-changing experience. Like he loved it. He went out to like New Mexico or somewhere like that, and he just lived in the desert for like 3 years working on this horse ranch. And like, so he
Mm-hmm.
loves horses. He walks like he's saddle sore all the time. Like it's just a hilarious fit as a human being for him, that like he's so into horses. But I think again, it's his wallpaper growing up was a cowboy scene. And like, so I think it's that socialization of maybe like connecting to a horse or having a magical experience, a unicorn, or like your own personal animal, versus like, right, I'm gonna go, you know, kill Indians and take their lands. Like there is like a imperialistic quality that's kind of gross about the cowboy mythos.
Oh, totally. And that's something I try to be cognizant of, because honestly, this is one of the dorkier things about me. I love to talk about Western saddles. They're just my favorite piece of technology. I find them fascinating. They haven't functionally changed in like 200 years. They just got it and won. Um,
Sure.
and so I love to talk about the function of the saddle, especially with quarter horses, and the way those two, the breed and the saddle and the equipment and the sort of American bullshit thing, all came together to form this cowboy culture as we know it. I
Hmm.
find fascinating, but I'm also keenly aware that it's like being a fan of Vikings. Like, they were the bad guys and everything. Like, you can't.
Yeah.
They're always doing bad. But
Well, and two, then I think like a lot of the socialization is based on bad science. So like
mm,
the whole alpha beta thing, like that's incorrect. Like that isn't how wolf packs work.
yeah,
And so like that's factually incorrect. And there's no overlap between wolf socializing and human socializing. So like even if it had been accurate, which we know definitively it is not, that
yeah.
is not how wolves socialize. There is
And
no correlation to um kind of
because
the way that humans socialize.
humans
Yeah.
don't run in
And
packs.
right,
A
that.
pack is
And
different than a village.
I look at things like, Jordan Peterson is the bane of my existence in a lot of ways as a therapist, because he's all the things wrong with therapy.
Everybody's
And one of his things was like using lobsters, and like, so again, it's bad science. Like you're taking an invertebrate's brain and comparing it to a vertebrate's brain and saying there's some sort of overlap. So again, like the socialization is on the nature nurture scale, like all of
Mhm.
this nurturing is based on bad science, and then like to see it have bad outcomes is not super surprising. I also think, as like I said, I'm a city slicker, so like I just no interaction with horses. Like
Mhm.
I got where my wife and I got married, her parents, her dad and stepmom live out in the country now in Michigan, like around nothing, and they have Clydesdales down the road. And like that was the first time I'd ever been like up close and in person, was like before I got
Clydesdales are
married. Because
huge.
yeah, I'm 6'3", I'm a big dude, and like I was like, oh dang, like that's a large animal.
Mhm. Yeah,
Like
they are
it is
big. They are
it is
big.
intimidating to walk up to one.
Yeah, it really is. And especially like they're probably very gentle, but
Yeah.
they step one foot wrong and your foot's gone. Like
Well,
it's
and like, you give them an apple and they just like absorb the whole thing. And
oh
it's like, oh, this is a
yeah,
large
they've
creature.
got
If it wanted to bite my hand, it would go away.
oh
Like,
god, and they do. They love it. It's very annoying. Um
um,
well I really like this idea. I've been thinking of like girls are fantasizing, you kind of touched on about like an animal companion, a special like relationship, whereas boys maybe it was more like a tool to an end, like the way you feel about a car, of like
right.
it's not about the personality, it's about yeah, I guess it just seems like girls really want to bond with animals. We all want to
Well,
be Snow White.
I'm a bit of a nerd, so like thinking of like The Witcher, like
Sure.
his relationship with Roach, his horse,
Hmm.
is a big selling point. I've not played the Red Dead Redemption games, but I know like you have a horse throughout it, and like so
Yeah.
I think I'm sure it's there. I think just
Mm,
in general, I would imagine boys are getting socialized from a younger age to not be like relational and to not be in touch
mm,
with their emotions. So
mhm,
even thinking of like a companion is like,
mhm.
I don't know, it's almost like in an isolation. Like me and this horse are going to go out and live in the desert and never see anyone again. It's not like this is how I have functional relationships with everyone in my life.
Oh my god, dude, sidebar, there was some horse drama on TikTok,
Okay.
which I am not on TikTok, but this dude, just some random dude from like Texas, was like, I'm gonna buy a horse and ride to Seattle or something like that. And bought this horse who was not in shape. The guy was not a rider. The guy had no idea what the fuck he was doing or talking about. And was like, oh, here I go. And just literally was like, cowboys do it. I can just like get on a horse and everything will be fine. And just people are panicking and I it's been resolved by now, I'm sure. I think it was a year ago, but it was just some white dude who didn't know what the fuck he was talking about and just thought you'd swing on a horse and put in a saddle and like pack a sack lunch and go.
Yeah.
Didn't bring a backup horse, didn't have like a farrier check, didn't do a vet check, didn't do like pack enough food for the horse, just assumed,
Yeah.
oh well, he'll just eat the food or eat the grass. Like it's this treating, it's an instinct of treating anything that is not, that you perceive as below you, as an object,
Yeah.
right? Like that's how they treat women, it's how they treat horses, it's how they treat cars. Like you'll just do the thing you're supposed to do, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, and
doing.
I think too, like a general misunderstanding of domestication. So like a lot of
Mm,
people, their interactions with wildlife, I'll put that in quotes, are their house cats or their dogs, and like the domestication process that has happened over millennia for those animals to act the way they act, versus something like a lizard. Like you can have a lizard as a pet, but you don't bond with it the same way. You can,
mhm.
but it's different. And something like
Probably
a
one
horse,
way
where
bonding.
where like it's just, yeah, I think it's a total lack of knowledge. And I think for growing up in a city, like just the lack of awareness around like how you need to respect wildlife. Like we're so
Mm,
removed from forces of nature, like,
yeah.
oh, a tornado came through, but like it didn't hit our house, so like back to capitalism, I'm still working, like, there is no like,
Yeah.
or like a seasonal awareness, like, oh, it's snowing, we're not hibernating, we're like just have to leave earlier so we can beat traffic. Like it's such a disconnect from, I think, nature and some of the natural processes.
You know what I was just thinking about yesterday? So at the barn, I teach lessons on Fridays, but most days I do what we call animal care, which is basically just managing the barn. So yesterday my shift was 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. and I had to. So we have 23 horses, and then a couple ponies and minis, some sheep, chickens, geese, a couple other animals. So I have to go in the morning and you feed all the horses, and they have grass hay, they have alfalfa hay, they have grains and supplements and things like that need to be weighed, medications that need to be administered. So like we have one horse, he has to get his meds 30 minutes before he eats. So you have to like inject his little meds in his mouth. Um, but anyway, so it's a long day, and I am busy from the moment I step foot on the barn to the moment I leave, and I love it. because it is all manual labor. It's just, all right, these stalls need to be cleaned. These horses need to be turned out. Those horses need to be brought in. It's just check off the next thing on the list. And all of a sudden 8 hours has gone by and I'm tired and happy and whatever. But all that's to say is, I was thinking the other day, I was cleaning out some paddocks and I was thinking, oh shit, the ground is going to freeze soon. We have to start thinking about this. And it just got me thinking about how we, especially city people, and certainly myself, when I'm not working on the barn, we don't change that much with the seasons. Like, obviously, people watch more TV in the winter and they gain 5 pounds and eat soup or whatever. But realistically, the activities we do aren't necessarily weather dependent. People go to the gym or whatever. And it's very interesting and cool to be part of a space that has to cycle through every season's very meaningfully. So this past week, I told you, fly masks. This past week, I was washing all of those so they can be stored for the winter, because obviously no flies in the winter. Now we're going to pull out the blankets for the winter. And there's something really satisfying about, like, okay, it is November. Here are the things that have to be done every November. And I think some people might see that as like a trap or a sort of, living a Groundhog's Day thing. I find it incredibly soothing, of the same way there's something soothing about, like, oh, it's strawberry season now. Like, oh, this is it's pumpkin season now. There's something really nice to mark time. Especially, I can't imagine, I'm a Midwesterner. I've always lived in the Midwest or in Montana. So I've never lived in a place without seasons for more than a year.
Right.
And I don't think I would like that or handle it well, because I think it would feel like marching in a straight line forever and ever, as opposed to like a cyclical thing of, like, now it's time to do this, now it's time to plant, now it's time to reap. I'll write a Beach Boys song about it. Birds. Beach Boys. What song is that? A time to wake up, a time to
that is the Birds.
The Birds? Okay.
I think so. It's
Do you
not
have
the Beach
bully
Boys.
listeners? Are they going to bully me if I get that wrong?
I don't think so. No. I'll be excited if I get extra listeners, even if they're coming just to bully you. But no, I mean, this is a fantastic segue. Watch this. ADHD brains find each other, and then we connect really well. I do think I also am a Midwesterner. I live in Milwaukee and like the seasons, and also have ADHD. So I think there's a neurodivergent component to liking the seasons changing. But I think in our modern society, we're very disconnected from nature, and we're very disconnected from our bodies. And so, things like yoga, things like therapeutic horse riding, these things get us back in touch with our body. That is considered healing for a lot of people, but that should be the default. Like living in a concrete jungle and never thinking about what's going into your body or putting processed foods, like that's all very, very unnatural. Segueing to one of your other jobs, like I think too, like some of the puritanical basis of our country's founding plays into that too. Like the religious, the Puritans, the guy who founded the state of Pennsylvania, like made oatmeal be as bland as possible because he thought spicy food gave you impure thoughts. Like,
is that the Kellogg story?
Kellogg's
guy, yeah. So people would stop masturbating. He invented cornflakes or something like that.
Right. Yeah. I don't know like what was going on with his digestive system that he thought inappropriate thoughts, but it's so I think there's this disconnect too, and that segues then into you are the co-host of the Friendly Atheist Podcast, and you get to spend all this time, a lot of time, talking about how the religious right is awful for everyone, whether you're religious or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. This show we've been doing now we just celebrated 500 episodes. We've been doing it for almost 10 years. And so much has changed over 10 years. And now we've gotten to a point where I am completely disconnected from the news. I don't follow any news shit on any social media. I don't have push alerts. I don't seek out the news because I can't anymore. And
Yeah.
I live in a happy little bubble for 6 days and 12 hours, and then Hemant comes over and reads all the worst parts of the news and shatters my fragile mental health for another week.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah.
so one of my specialties is religious trauma, and I love the podcast. I was raised evangelical fundamentalist, um, basically in a nice little cult that exists in Milwaukee, pretty much.
Is it a
Um,
Milwaukee cult? Ooh, I don't know about that.
yeah, it checks a lot of boxes. You know, I talk about mainstream Christianity as a cult. So, but it's the podcast I love because it's a balance between Hemant, who's very process based and kind of goes point by point, and here's the
Mhm.
news, and then you're kind of like the emotional response to all of this, which is like,
The
what the
chaos
fuck are
agent.
we doing here? And as somebody who is raised in it, like it's very that's like very genuine, and like, oh, like I wasn't allowed to feel that while I was religious, and now I can be also equally offended and bothered by it. So I love kind of the dynamic you guys have developed in
Thank you.
the what the fuck of it all.
Yeah, it's a strong bummer. It's been a weird. So I've been with the Friendly Atheist brand since 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And I think back to the stuff I was writing about then, and it was obviously the election. It was the a woman's body has a whole way of shutting that thing down by what's his face. It was Mitt Romney, and it was the Chick-fil-A thing. Those were sort of the big headline
Sure.
stories. And truly, like, hearkening back to a time when Chick-fil-A being homophobic was like the peak of our problems, is the rose-colored glasses are intense. It's
What a simpler time.
true. Like, I cannot even, like, even what's his face saying, oh, I understand the woman's body has a whole way of shutting that down if it's a legitimate rape or whatever. Even like that, if somebody said that right now, it wouldn't even make a news cycle. It's just what people are kind of saying.
Right.
So I think the problem I'm having right now is a okay. I have learned a lot about myself recently. And one of the things that I find to be extremely triggering is when I watch people behave in a way that I cannot understand the motivation behind. It makes no sense to me. So like
Mm-hmm.
I was watching, there's a show called Bad Sisters on Apple TV. And it doesn't matter what it's about, but there is a detective or an insurance detective guy who is trying to get to the bottom of this death. But there is nothing for him to grab onto, but he keeps pursuing it even with for no reason. And I found it so agitating because it was just like, that's not how a person should act. That's not how a person would respond to this situation. When you're lined up with this set of facts, no person in the universe would go to the right. Everybody else would go to the left. So I have a really, really, really hard time watching people behave in a way that I find to be not only contrary to my values, but contrary to just the way the world works or the way, humans are. I just find it so agitating because I really want to understand things. I really, really,
Yeah.
really try to understand things. I try to put myself in, like, okay, this woman genuinely believes in her heart of hearts that like every sperm and egg combination is a sweet baby with a whole ass personality and is going to cure cancer. Like, okay, fine. I can put myself in that position because while I do not agree with it, I understand what she is using to make this decision.
Yeah.
When I watch people the Supreme Court just make bullshit up, like with the Kennedy ruling, particularly Sotomayor, like brought the receipts, and people just would not acknowledge it. It's like watching people in a movie, and you're like, don't don't go behind that door. There's a murderer behind that door. Like,
Right.
what human being would do this thing? And yet they are doing them. And I find it so troubling and agitating, and because it's unpredictable, because that means it's completely whatever they decide is the next big bad is whatever it is, and there's nothing to be done because you cannot logic somebody out of something they didn't logic themselves into.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. I kept moving more and more liberal and more progressive while I was still a Christian, until I was like, wait, I'm just not a Christian is the thing. But it's fascinating. I just wrote like a really long, probably the longest blog I've ever written about Mike Johnson, who's the new Speaker of the House, his wife, and her batshit crazy therapy that she did. And as I'm a therapist, and I take personal offense at someone claiming my profession and doing it poorly. But also, like, even for religious fundamentalists, it was like way the fuck out there. And so, like, it's fascinating. I went back and got my certification in religious trauma to like understand some of this stuff, because it's when you're in it, you don't notice like how crazy it is. But it's not like a huge jump to go from like, oh, well, if you believe the Earth is only 6,000 years old and like magic exists, but only for your special chosen people, like it's not so crazy to use like old outdated medicine and think that's totally fine. Like you're living your life off of old outdated religious writings. So like, but there is that like voice of reason. And so your perspective, like I was not being raised religious or not being like particularly fundamentalist, is so fascinating. Like coming out of it is fascinating, but then hearing from somebody who didn't grow up in it and like, what the fuck? Like none of this makes any sense. It's like, oh, right. Like there's no frame of reference where this makes sense. It is just cult mind control behavior.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I say I'm culturally Catholic. My family writ large was Catholic, but I didn't, I wasn't, I was baptized because my grandmother threatened to kidnap me and my brother unless we were baptized. So we're baptized.
Nice. The ends justify the means. Classic Christianity.
Exactly. Oh my God. And my parents were so shocked when I told them that I was an atheist. I was like, you told me that Granny was going to kidnap me, and you told me CCD sucks. Like, what did you think was going to happen?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I know light Catholic shit. Also, I am in a lot of ways woefully naive about how a lot of mainstream Christianity functions, because I grew up in a very Catholic area. So to me, Catholic and Christian were interchangeable. I did not understand that there was a distinction between them until I was in college, because it just didn't come up. I went to whatever church I was supposed to go to for that wedding or that funeral, and I didn't discriminate against them. And they were mostly Catholic, and they all had the guy in the dress, and it was echoey and intimidating and scary, and I didn't like it. But so like I am coming into a lot of this stuff completely fresh, because I'm not carrying around the burden of having to unlearn religious shit. I have to unlearn a lot of like misogyny, and I have to unlearn a lot of like racism, and I have to unlearn a lot, but I am not having to step out from the veil of religion, and I can more or less make, have an understanding of like the morality of something as, disengaged from what the Bible would say is moral, right? So, yeah. So like to me, I never had those like weird gut responses that you have, even when you don't actually agree with it anymore or whatever, you just have that like, and I don't have to have that of, oh, this person and this person are moving in together. Oh, no, it's fine. Like those are things I did not have to overcome.
Yeah.
So, and also it lets me be a lot meaner about religion, because I don't have anybody I'm worried is going to like yell at me at Christmas.
Yeah, which is helpful. I think too, I mean, it highlights how the religious right affects everybody. Like these are not religious issues anymore. They are, this person is taking their magic book of spells and trying to pass laws based on it. And that affects you, who was raised culturally Catholic, but is an atheist now. Like it's not harmless. It's not just doctrinal for like biblical scholars to debate. It is like problematic for society at large.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
so, this being a podcast about mental health, let's talk a little bit. Obviously, going to the barn is good for you. Obviously, you've made enough cultural references, I think, for people to know that there's a recreational component to consuming media. But I'm
That
curious,
is the dorkiest thing I have ever heard a person say. There's a recreational component of consuming media. Are you out of your mind?
I thought that was a nice way to say you watch a lot of shows and movies.
I just have never heard somebody medicinalize that so hard. Yeah,
Well,
I
okay,
watch a
but
lot of TV.
it's good because I talk about this a lot in therapy. Like mindlessly watching TV gives you minimal benefit. If you're intentional with saying Survivor is on Mondays and that's our show, we're going to make time, we're going to make a pizza, we're going to do a whole thing. If we add some intention to it, you can actually get a bigger mental health benefit from it. But you also talked about like taking a break from news and some of that stuff. So like kind of how do you navigate all this secondary trauma you're taking in from the podcast that you're a co-host of? And what do you do to kind of like mellow out and balance that throughout the week?
God, I mean, and we've spoken a little bit. Truly, the month of October was among the worst months of my entire life.
Right.
So I've been doing a lot. So, my therapist, and I adore my therapist. Her name is Sarah. Hi, Sarah. I love you. I miss you. I can't wait till my insurance allows me to see you again. I was talking to her years ago because I started seeing her because I was depressed and I hated my job and felt trapped. And I will say my therapist saved my relationship with my parents. I don't think I would have a relationship with them. Not that I wouldn't have one. I certainly wouldn't have the one I do now without her. But one of the things she taught me that I rely on almost every day is using what I want to watch or read or eat or consume as a gauge of like how I'm doing. So if I find myself retreating into rewatching Community for the 4th time this month, well, it's November now, so 0 times this month, 4 times last month. And if I finish that and the prospect of trying to figure out something else to watch or do is so overwhelming, I just start it again because any decision that I make feels terrible. So, rewatching stuff, I'm rereading like some romance novels that I love because for me, reading is one of the few with, my ADHD, reading's one of the few times I'm like actually fully focused because it really is maybe the only time. And I think that's why I like to do it so much is it's really hard for me to shut off my brain. I do a lot of, I'm watching TV and all of a sudden, oh my God, I haven't been listening for the last 30 seconds or whatever. So reading familiar stuff is really, really helpful for me. And then on the other side of it, when I'm starting to like seek out something new, it's sort of a signal to myself like, okay, all right, I'm sort of coming around. I'm getting out of this funk and this malaise and moving forward. So that's a really nice thing to do. I don't know. I've been working on turning off my brain a lot because it runs just constantly. Yeah. And so oftentimes I will like play a video, like a little iPad video game and have like Community on or something at the same time, just so I can like, it's almost like a sound bath of like, my brain is occupied, it's processing things, so I don't have time to do some bullshit in the background and I can just rest. But I try to be very aware of what is bringing me happiness and what isn't and things like that and kind of I just let myself be indulgent when I need it.
Sure.
But yeah, so those are my main things. The thing is I used to play music and I used to cross stitch and I used to do all these things and I just one by one put them down because everything felt hard and everything I had to work at felt like overwhelming.
Yeah.
So
a lot of good stuff in there, I think. obviously having a therapist who you like and is a good fit is a huge win. And I always tell people, like, if you don't like your therapist, get a new one. Although I will say, as a couples therapist, a lot of my clients get mad at me for various things, and they should not fire me. But also, like, when you're neurodivergent, being aware of what you're putting into your body, like your diet, your nutritional intake, and your my chihuahuas. Look at this rapscallion trying to get on camera here.
Yeah.
He's being needy. This is Baskerville. You're gonna get cut from the
Baskerville,
podcast.
are you a hound?
Yeah, he's a little hellhound. That's his name. All right, go on.
Baskerville. What was the ending of that? Didn't they not exist or something? They're like a hallucination.
It was like a large dog that was being.
That's right.
Like phosphorant stuff on its eyes and just general animal abuse. He's not abused. He's wildly spoiled.
No,
He's turned 12.
I can hear my dog thumping up the stairs, so she might make an appearance in a sec.
So what you put in your body is obviously very important, and then just paying attention, like when those things stop working, or your ADHD brain decides like it's done with a hobby. Like it's hard to get that back sometimes, and just being like, all right, well, what am I doing instead? Because my brain wants something new and novel. So
is that a virtue of ADHD, of that sort of like deeply intense, and then all of a sudden like I'm never gonna do this thing again?
Yep.
Yeah.
That happens with hobbies. That happens with food. I don't know if you have that with food. So a lot of my sensory issues are
100% with food.
Yeah. And I have a 5-year-old who almost assuredly also has ADHD. I think he's had honey bunches of oats cereal for like 95% of his meals the past 3 months. So
I so feel that in such a real way. It's so strange. And it's really hard to explain to your partner why it's like, oh, I'm actually done with this thing now that I did eat every day for the last year, but I'm never going to touch it again. Bye.
Yeah, my wife will be like, hey, we still have that huge thing from Costco that you were super into. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, it's going to sit in our freezer for 2 more years until I throw it out. Like, don't like food waste, but also a neurodivergent. So yeah, I think there's a lot of fascinating things around just that topic. I obviously nerd out about the neurodivergence. And I'm fascinated. I love animals and dogs specifically. So I love animal assisted therapy. But like the horse stuff's new for me. So this has been a learning experience for me. And there's so much like that my brain fired on is like, oh, I wonder what the science behind that is. I wonder who's researching that.
Truly, if you're in the Chicagoland area, you're more than welcome to come visit. It's like 294 and I-55. It's open, like anybody who's listening or who's in the area. The property is open to the public. We've got baby goats. We just got a baby horse. Oh, it's the fucking best. But yeah, people bring their kids and look at the sheep and watch the ponies bully each other. We have mini donkeys. They're the best. But
I did see a miniature horse, a therapeutic miniature horse recently I went to a eating disorder event, and they had a miniature therapy horse on site.
I talked to you a little bit about horses and eating disorders, just like a tiny bit.
Yeah.
So thankfully I've never struggled with an eating disorder. I have had struggled with weight on and off. So I am in charge every day of feeding, some days of feeding a lot of horses. And we have, like I said, we have a big guy named Prince. He's half Percheron. He's a big gentleman. His hooves are like this. And then we have like little tiny like ponies that are as big as, like a Irish Wolfhound, or big as like one of your Great Danes. And literally, I'm thinking of 2 horses who are diametrically opposed, and they eat the same amount of food. And he probably outweighs her by 800 pounds.
Sure.
And there is something very interesting and rewarding isn't the right word. I can't satisfying maybe, of realizing that horses' bodies, and by extension our bodies, are animals' bodies, it is not calories in versus calories out. It is just not that simple. Because when you're looking at a pony who barely works, and she's getting the same amount of food as a giant horse who works all the time, and neither of them are over or underweight, they're both healthy and happy. To me, it is a reminder that things are not that simple, that our bodies are so much more complicated than anybody can understand. Because if, like, it just seeing the changes a horse can make over a week, if they've gotten one extra flake of hay than they're supposed to, or you can see the changes in their bodies. And you when you start thinking about food as something that's nurturing and an additive and not something that you have to be restrictive of, to me, it's kind of really helped me focus my attention to how people eat and all that stuff in a way I had not ever really thought about. And I read something similar about Blair Braverman is a woman who does dog sledding. And she did a whole list kind of about the same thing of like, these dogs are all from the same litter. They all do the same thing every single day. This dog needs 6 times more food than this dog. That's just bodies. That's just how they do.
But, yeah. Well, and I love, I used to work in higher ed. And so I would write letters for people to have their emotional support animal on campus because it's a animal-free campus. But like somebody being in charge of feeding their bunny, like the way that you relate to your dependent eating versus the way that you process your own thought process around your body and your intake is different. And so like having that different frame of reference is validating, like that experience kind of loosens up the way that your brain processes it, which can be really helpful.
That's so good, because I'm just thinking of like, oh, so-and-so acts like this when she's hungry. And like human beings are just like that. Like, why is this horse doing this? Well, it's cold. That horse hates the cold weather. Like, and I personally, I can extend more grace to a horse who is just reacting to its stimuli the way any of us are. I can extend grace to that horse, but not to like myself when it's cold and I'm cranky and I'm like, get it together, Jess. Like, it gives you a little more space. Last thing, I assume you have to go. But
I'm good. I record on days when I have time.
Oh, perfect. Tennant is coming over in like 20 minutes. So when he gets here, I'll stop. Especially when I have my riders ride bareback, which is a whole different sensory experience than riding with the saddle. You can feel their muscles move under you, like in a way that is unlike anything most people really experience. But one thing I have my kids do, especially if they're up or feeling tense, I get them on their horse and I have them go stand somewhere and close their eyes. And they can open their eyes when they can feel their horse breathing under them. Because you can feel it fairly easily, but you have to be really quiet and really calm. And so when they're seeking that out, they naturally are just quieting their body. And then they physically are sort of in a better place to like proceed with the lesson. And that you're searching for that stimuli. We're not naturally searching for stimuli under our thighs or our butt, right? Like,
right.
But when you're riding a horse, you have to be physically engaged with everything, and your balance has to be your own. You can't be too dependent on your horse, because if that horse trips and you're leaning forward, you're going off. It's like almost couples skating of you have a really important bond and are reliant on each other, but you each have your own roles and both of you have to perform those roles well.
Yeah.
And horses, another thing about horses is that they instinctively look for a leader. And that's basically why humans can quote unquote control horses, is because as we kind of talked about earlier, the size of the animal, and when we talk about quote unquote alpha males, jerk off motion, they act like the biggest, toughest wolf or whatever nightmare they have is the one in charge, when anybody who's worked with any kind of herd animal knows that that is not how it works. We have a tiny, tiny pony, Blossom, and she'll kick all y'all's ass. Like, she doesn't give a shit. So our big horse, well, he's a bully, actually. That wasn't a good example. But like, our biggest horses are not the ones who are in charge. It's the ones who have the leadership drive of whatever, want to be a head mare. And it's usually the mares who are in charge. A mare is a female horse. And so when you're interacting with horses, you are going with an energy like, hey, I'm in charge. And we are just fooling them into thinking that we're bigger than them. That's all it is. We are fooling them into thinking that we can kick their ass, and we super can't. And God help us if they test us ever. But that's another thing I wonder, going back to like why girls are interested in horses. You are controlling a very large animal, but you're not doing it by muscling it around. Mm-hmm. You're doing it by connecting with it and forming a partnership, deciding together you're going to move forward. Because, if I'm walking a horse and I say walk on and he doesn't move, it's because he doesn't take me seriously as a leader. He doesn't think I'm going to protect him when push comes to shove. So you have to assert yourself as a leader. It's a very fake it till you make it kind of thing of like, you have to walk up to a horse with confidence. And
sure.
And there's a woman who's working with a horse the horse is off the chart smart, and she's kind of timid, and she's had trouble with him, like trying to jerk her around and do this, that, or the other. And I was walking behind her and I said, relax your arm that you're holding the lead rope on, shoulders back, and walk like you're the boss of this place, and they will respect it. And I was genuinely just yesterday saying, this horse, Walter, he drags everybody into the grass so he can eat. He's hungry. He wants to go eat, and he's gigantic. He's never once tried that with me, ever. None of the horses do, because I have asserted myself as, quote unquote, the alpha. And so they just don't fuck with me. They know that they can't get away with whatever bullshit they want to get away. It's like a babysitter versus your mom, right? Like, oh, I can do whatever the fuck. Oh, mom's home. She's not going to let me do anything cool. And they just don't test me. And it's until you take a step back and kind of realize, when I walk around the barn, the horses are constantly calling to me, because when they see me, they're like, that bitch has food and I want her here. And so all of a sudden I am like a focus point for the horses, because they recognize me as the provider of food and are even less likely to fuck with me because I am that person to them now. And it's like weird politics on like the lowest scale, you know what I mean? Of this horse can't go near that horse because they have this whole little subculture that they're working out. Whew, sorry, I just love talking about horses.
No, I love it. And you mentioned this earlier, that like there aren't a lot of these therapeutic riding programs in the country. Like there's a barn in the area that I think does some very little therapy stuff on the side, but that's not really what it's for. So I was excited to connect with you because it is a rare thing. Like I'm in Milwaukee, and your location in Illinois is the closest one. Like, so talking about crossing state lines and needing to have some of that stuff, and I'm sure all the work that goes into funding it and like getting grants and all that stuff, I'm sure is a whole separate and much less exciting topic.
Well, that would be an off mic conversation because funding is, I make minimum wage doing what I do. Like I have to have another job in addition to the podcast so I can afford the expensive habit of working at a therapeutic barn. Like there's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made to do this. And I love it, but I wish I could make enough money to live doing the job that I'm doing. But that's socialism or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I'm married to an early childhood educator, so I get that. We do not. We do not, as a society, take care of people who are taking care of other people.
I don't know if it's the older I get or watching the world unfold, but I am getting angrier and angrier about how what work we value in this country. Because do you think you bring more good to the world or a fucking hedge fund investor does? Like, do you think I am more vital to somebody's like society or like the CFO of whatever? Like, whatever. It's just, it's frustrating because the work we do is hard and emotionally taxing and valuable with a capital V. And nobody gives a shit.
Yeah. That's why I have a podcast called Your Therapist Needs Therapy. But it's fascinating. That's a separate topic. Hopefully it is getting better, because I do think the religious right is shrinking. It's just getting more extreme while that happens, as everybody is leaving church. But yeah, there might need to be like a revolution or something that happens, because COVID showed us we need garbage men, we need nurses, we need teachers. We don't need any of this other bullshit.
People have been learning that lesson and ignoring it for
Right.
50 years, right? What was the sanitation strike in New York? What was that, the 70s?
Yeah.
Like, the city shut the fuck down.
We are seeing workers strike more often. You know, there's a healthcare strike that was going on in California that got sorted after like 2 days, which is like they got everything they wanted. The auto unions got new contracts. So
yeah, the writers.
I try and be optimistic. I do, like you, have to take breaks. The Supreme Court is especially bothersome for me. So, you know, I have to take my breaks and step away from it. And doing religious trauma, then I'm working with people who not only understand the concept, but have been victims of abuse in these various ways. So, yeah, I should probably,
good, I guess.
I should probably find a horse that I can bond with and learn how to groom and all that stuff.
Where in Milwaukee are you?
I am on the very north side of Milwaukee. So I know there's a barn up in Mequon, which is this is very in conversation for people who are familiar with urban Midwest.
We didn't get to talk much about it, but I'm in the Wisconsin area a ton, looking at horses, because you're kind of in not therapeutic horse country, but horse country in general. Like Dodgeville is a huge horse hub, and like near Madison. Anyway, it doesn't matter, not important. Sure. But truly, if you are down in the Chicagoland, we're right off 294. It's very easy to get to, and you've got my contact information. You should come down and see what it's all about. Sure.
Same. I mean, if you're driving through Milwaukee, let's grab a drink or a coffee, and we can talk about dogs. You can meet the creatures.
Can you see Dottie? Oh, there she is.
I did. I saw a fluffy white tail go by earlier.
She's such a good. Oh, hi. Okay. Anyway,
Jessica, this has been fantastic. I have a lot of guests who have ADHD. I think I say neurodivergent brains find each other, so I think that keeps happening. If people want to find out more about the Hanson Center, people want to find out more about the work you do, people want to find you with the Friendly Atheist, where did they go? What are we promoting?
It's such a hard question to answer, because it used to be Twitter, but I haven't.
Yeah, it's just a cesspool, you know.
There. Listen, if you are interested in learning about therapeutic riding, join the Friendly Atheist group on Facebook, or honestly, the Hanson Center has a Facebook group if you want to learn about it. Here's what I will say. This is what I want to promote. Even if you have no experience with horses and don't know the back from the front, your skills and your humanity are needed in these therapeutic riding centers. It is as beneficial to the volunteers as it is to our riders. We have one volunteer who comes in once a week, sweeps the aisle, and leaves. That's it. And we adore her because that aisle needs swept every single day. So if you want to get involved, if you're looking for a hobby, if you want to be outside a little bit more, want to touch grass, as it were, look into volunteering with your local therapeutic riding center or something similar. It's really gratifying. You learn a ton. Horse people are out of their entire mind, so buyer beware. But a wonderful community, and accepting and kind and gentle, and a nice place to spend a day.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll have links to those Facebook groups, and we'll have links to the podcast down in the show notes. Jess, this has been fantastic. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Jeremy. Sorry, I canceled so many times.
That's good. We joked, we've rescheduled a couple of times, and I said, like, what sort of podcast host would I be about mental health if I didn't say, hey, like, take care of your mental health first. We'll record. It's a podcast. Who cares?
Yes.
So, yes. And thank you to all the wonderful listeners. You can find all my stuff at wellnesswithjared.com, and we'll be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.